Welcome back to the Psyche and Singularity series. I am going over my book, Psyche and Singularity, Jungian Psychology, and Holographic String Theory. I am saying that there is a very noticeable parallel between Carl Jung's psychology of the archetype of the self and Leonard Suskind's holographic string theory. In the book, after going over the history of physics, from Newton's theory of gravity through Einstein's special and general theories of relativity to quantum mechanics to string theory, so as to explain what the gravitational singularity is according to the most cutting-edge physics today. And then in the book I go over the history of the philosophical concept of the self, so as to show the trajectory leading to Carl Jung and Wolfgang Pauli's theory of the archetype of the self, the unus mundus. And I begin with the Vedanta philosophy of India, and specifically the Vishnu-worshipping branch of Vedanta cosmology, the Vaishnava Vedanta school. The point of going over this ancient cosmology is that it shows the big picture of what a fusion of Jung psychology and Leonard Suskind's string theory would look like. What would be this new worldview, this emerging worldview by a synthesis of Jung and Susskind. According to Jung's own theory, we have a collective unconscious mind. This is why he broke away from his mentor, Sigmund Freud. So Freud was accepting Carl Jung as his protege, his predecessor, but they had a break because Carl Jung did not believe that we only have a personal unconscious mind, which was Freud's theory. So Carl Jung said, yes, we do have a personal unconscious, but deeper than that, we have a collective unconscious. Your personal unconscious is different than mine, and then everybody else has their own individual biography and the things that they repress, but we all share a common collective unconscious mind. And that consists of these archetypal patterns of perception, these lenses of cognition that force our ways of knowing the cosmos into very particular patterns of understanding, and these corresponding instinctual patterns of behavior. When we see certain archetypal scenarios, it triggers a certain archetypal pattern of response. So we'll be going over these kinds of ideas throughout the book. I go over this and throughout these video series. But for right now, I want to point out that Carl Jung said, if an idea really does rise from an archetype of the collective unconscious, then it must have historical predecessors. And I think the most notable parallel between this Jung-Susskind synthesis and cosmologies of the past is the Vaishnava Vedanta cosmology. And that's furthermore not surprising considering the near-death experience, which is so similar, Carl Jung's near-death experience, which is so similar to Suskind's holographic string theory. The central figure he encountered there was this black Hindu. So with that in mind, in this video I'm going to be going over the parallels between the Jung-Susskind synthesis and the Vaishnava Vedanta cosmology, featuring specifically the ultimate black Hindu Krishna, the form of Vishnu, the most famous form of Vishnu, the star of the classic Indian text, the Bhagavad-Gita, as well as the Bhagavat Purana, Srimad Bhagavatam, and I'll also be going over one of the Upanishads. So, having said that, a very brief review. According to Leonard Suskind's cosmology, we live in a megaverse of universes. The reason that is so important for his first book, The Cosmic Landscape, String Theory and the Illusion of Intelligent Design, is because the constants of nature that are required for biological life to exist are so finely tuned that it seems as if some divine intelligence orchestrated them all. And in particular, he points out the cosmological constant. And Susskind says, man, that does seem like that's an intelligent designer perfectly fine-tuning the universe in this ultra exquisitely, extremely fine-tuned way. On the other hand, if we see our universe as just one in a megaverse of universes, a practically infinite number of universes, then the ultra minute probability that at least one of these universes will emerge with all of the constants prepared for life is ultimately inevitable. So you do not need a divine designer to customize all of the constants of nature for life to emerge. So the idea of a megaverse of parallel universes for Susskind saves humanity from the need to revert to archaic ideas of a divine intelligence orchestrating everything. Okay, that's fine. However, if you look in the history of philosophy back to this Vaishnava Vedanta cosmology of India, you'll see that it also has a megaverse of bubble-shaped universes emerging from something very similar to the quantum vacuum, which they call Brahman. So as we're going to see, each of the essential ingredients of Leonard Susskind's cosmology is present in the Vaishnava Vedanta cosmology. According to this Vaishnava cosmology, all of existence, 3/4 of the totality of infinite existence, is a spiritual realm, populated by spiritual planets called Vishnu lokas. Vishnu is the name for the supreme God, but there are many forms of this infinite omnipresent God. So each planet of Vishnu is also a planet of Lakshmi, the female counterpart of Vishnu. So inhabiting each of these spiritual planets is a Lakshmi-Vishnu pair. The most famous Vishnu form is Krishna. So Radharani is the name of his female counterpart. So Radha, Krishna, they preside on one Vishnu loka, one planet of Vishnu, specifically known as Goloka, planet cow, because Krishna is the cowboy. And all of the species there are perfectly self-aware. They're made of eternal knowledge and bliss. They have forms just like the species on Earth, and the difference is that they are eternal, fully blissful, and each part has all of the knowledge of the whole. And there are innumerable of these Vishnu planets, each of them populated by Vishnu Lakshmi, surrounded by an ecosystem of eternal spiritual forms. Now, 1/4 of this infinite expanse of existence is our material realm. So from each of these planets of Vishnu radiates a spiritual light, Brahma Jyoti, also called Brahman. And part of the sky ocean of Brahman coagulates into what's known as the causal ocean. And in that causal ocean, a Vishnu form descends from the spiritual world, Karano Dakashai Vishnu, also known as Mahavishnu, Big Vishnu, and he lays down on this causal ocean, goes to sleep, and starts to dream, and from the pores of his skin exhale innumerable bubble universes. And then in the center of each of these bubble universes is another form of Vishnu, Garbo Dakashai Vishnu. And then in the center of each material and spiritual atom in each of these bubble universes is another Vishnu incarnation, Kshiro Dakashai Vishnu, also known as Param Atma. Atma means soul, Param means topmost. The topmost soul, or the super soul, located in each material and spiritual atom. And furthermore, in the surrounding sphere of each universe, the ether sphere, or Akasha, the past, the present, and the future are interwoven by a thread, Sutratman. Sutra means thread, Atman means soul, a thread soul. And I'll be reading from texts where they specifically describe this thread, the supreme controller as a thread, and that the illusion of three-dimensional objects evolving over time is specifically radiating in from this Akasha, the Akashic record you might have heard about, where the past, the present, and the future coexist. It's also important to note that according to this Vaishnava Vedanta cosmology, each universal bubble consists of 8 concentric spheres. The innermost sphere is the earth element, a hollow sphere of the element earth. Outside of that is the water sphere, then the elemental fire sphere, then the sphere of the element air, and then the ether, also known as Akasha. But beyond that, there's 3 more spheres of subtle material energy: mind, intelligence, and false ego. There's 2 kinds of matter for this cosmology: gross matter, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, which is the intermediary between the gross matter and the subtle matter, mind, intelligence, and false ego. Outside of the false ego is the causal ocean, which is a kind of a temporary coagulation in the same way that yogurt is a coagulation of milk. The causal ocean is a kind of coagulation of Brahman, which is the light emanating from the spiritual planets. So there's innumerable Brahmandas, or universes, floating in this causal ocean, which is exhaling from Mahavishnu as he dreams. The fact that this material megaverse of universes is considered to be the dream of God is also very important for a branch of theology known as Theodicy, which is how can there be an all-powerful, all-good God, and nevertheless there is evil in the world? If you see this material world as God's unconscious mind or God's dream, that puts a new twist on that kind of a fundamental question. But getting back to the main point here is we're looking for parallels between the Carl Jung, Leonard Susskind synthesis of worldviews and ancient cosmologies in order to demonstrate, according to Carl Jung's own theory, that this Jung-Susskind synthesis is emerging from an archetype, a timeless archetype of the collective unconscious. It must have historical antecedents. The Vedanta philosophy has very noticeable parallels as we've just gone over. So I will now get into some more of the details of this cosmology. I'll begin with the Bhagavad-Gita, which in chapter 15.1, Krishna explains to his cousin Arjuna that the material world is an inverted reflection of the spiritual world. So I'm quoting from A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada's translation of the Bhagavad-Gita. In the introduction, he quotes this first verse of the 15th chapter, and he says, "The Supreme Lord said, there is a banyan tree which has its roots upward and its branches down, and the Vedic hymns are its leaves. One who knows this tree is the knower of the Vedas." So he explains that you can see a tree that grows upside down as a reflection on a body of water. If you see a tree reflected on a pond, the roots look like they're going straight up, and the tip of the tree looks like it's pointing straight down. So he concludes his purport here by saying, similarly, this material world is a reflection of the spiritual world. The material world is but a shadow of reality. So, like Carl Jung and Wolfgang Pauli, they were looking for parallels between psychology and physics. Similarly, the Bhagavad-Gita says that this material world is a inverted reflection of the spiritual world. If you break that down to first principles, it implies the psychology of the Atman, the individual soul, will be mirrored by the physics of the atom. And that is what I'm trying to demonstrate here. So another good quote about the thread that conserves information at the cosmic horizon and creates, where the past, the present, and future coexist and creates this world, is found in the Bhagavad-Gita. So Krishna elsewhere says in chapter 7, verses 2 through 8, he says, "Everything rests upon me as pearls are strung on a thread. I am the sound in ether and ability in man." And then later in chapter 10, verse 20, he says, "I am the self, O Gudakesha, seated in the hearts of all creatures. I am the beginning, the middle, and the end of all beings." So calling yourself a thread upon which everything rests like pearls is a good parallel with holographic string theory. Later in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, not later, in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, another text from the Vaishnava Vedanta school, Udalaki Aruni asks, Patanjala Kapya, "Do you know the string on which this world and the next, as well as all beings, are strung together?" Then he says, "Do you know the inner controller of this world and the next, as well as of all beings, who controls them from within?" So we saw Krishna say he is this thread, who is the soul of all souls. And then concluding in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, he says, if a man knows what that string is and who that inner controller is, he knows Brahman, he knows the worlds, he knows the gods, he knows the Vedas, he knows the spirits, he knows the self, he knows all. Later in that same Upanishad, we hear that the things above the sky, the things below the earth, and the things between the earth and the sky, as well as all those things people here refer to as past, present, and future, on space, Gargi, are all these woven back and forth. Space is the translation of the word akasha. So we see the fundamental distinguishing ingredient of Leonard Suskind's cosmology, which is this layer of information conservation at the horizon of the cosmos, which is projected in by threads of energy. We see that parallel in the Vedanta cosmology. The most fundamental parallel is the particle-wave parallel of quantum mechanics. We went over that in previous videos. As demonstrated by the two-slit experiment, quantum particles, photons, electrons, any tiny particle acts like an individual particle when you observe it. When you're not observing it, it behaves like a wave of probability. That particle-wave paradox is very similar to the Atman equals Brahman cosmology of the Vedanta philosophy. And that was pointed out by Erwin Schrödinger, for example, who discovered the Schrödinger wave equation that describes the quantum wave of probability, in a book entitled What is Life?, which he wrote in 1944, the same year as Carl Jung had his near-death experience. Schrödinger applied quantum theory to the realm of biology in search of the self-replicating mechanism of a cell, which later was discovered to be DNA 9 years later by Watson and Crick, by Francis Crick. Francis Crick read What is Life? That helped inspire the discovery of DNA. In the epilogue to that book, What is Life?, Schrödinger talks about the Atman equals Brahman philosophy. The individual Atman, the individual personal point of subjective consciousness, is equal to the ocean of potential precognitive bliss, Brahman, the particle wave paradox. Schrödinger talked about that in his book, What is Life? Also, David Bohm, who was the first prominent physicist to appeal to the holographic paradigm in an attempt to synthesize quantum mechanics and general relativity. He also points to the Atman equals Brahman parallels with the particle wave paradox, and Bohm believed that just as the Atman equals Brahman equation indicates, that the cosmos is conscious, that consciousness is not a byproduct of material chemicals. It's interwoven with the fabric of space-time, as is everything else. All of the information of the entire cosmos is interwoven at each point, which Bohm calls the implicate order, and then it manifests as the three-dimensional objects we perceive evolving through time in the explicate order. But he noted the parallels between that philosophy and the Atman equals Brahman philosophy. So those are the basic parallels between the Vedanta cosmology and the synthesis of Susskind and Jung's cosmology. We see the Vishnu in the center of every bubble universe, very similar to the singularity in the bubble of every universe in the megaverse. We see and also according to quantum mechanics, there's a singularity at every point of the underlying quantum vacuum, just like there's a singularity in every material and spiritual atom, according to the Vaishnava Vedanta cosmology. And there's a threaded layer of information conservation. So to summarize it all with a couple of pictures. So here you see is the form of Mahavishnu there in the center, that four-armed big Vishnu form. That would be Mahavishnu. Descending, you'll see from the top there, that is Krishna, the cowherd boy on planet Cow. You see emanating from planet Cow a lot of other spiritual universes, and then the sleeping form of Vishnu, and then you see all the bubbles coming out of him. And in the center there, you'll see another form of Vishnu, the Garbhodakashayi Vishnu. And then in the center of every bubble, of every atom and spiritual atom, is another Vishnu, the Supersoul. Those are called the Purusha avatars. So that cosmology clearly resembles holographic string theory cosmology, especially when you synthesize it with Carl Jung. We'll see other very detailed parallels between this Jung-Susskind synthesis and Plato's cosmology as presented in the Timaeus in the next video, and then after that we'll see parallels between this Jung-Susskind synthesis and Plato's dialogue, The Republic.